Alrighty, welcome to another Behind the Scenes Prospects Corner. We have another incredible episode here today. As always, I am Jared Perkins, but I'm joined by a very special guest, Jake Wiener of Prospects 1500. Jake, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Jared.
Yeah, really excited to have you on. Talk a little bit about the Tampa Bay Rays system. Later on, we'll have an interview coming up with Colby White, top 30 prospect in the Rays system right now. But Jake, just for the viewers here, we want to really dive into these systems for each team. So, what's the overall status of the Rays farm system currently? As we know, they've been one of the best, and it still seems like they are one of the best.
Absolutely. So it almost seems like a legacy at this point that they're considered one of the top farm systems, in baseball. I consider thinking about in the beginning of this season, our Prospects 1500 team. We did a ranking of the farm systems, and the Rays came in sixth. Often when they had Wander Franco and such, they were generally considered the top premier farm system in the league. But I think it is, generally higher than most, just due to the success of several prospects and perennially considered one of the top development systems in the sport as well. So although they had lost an uber prospect like Wander Franco, somebody like Junior Caminero is now at the top of the system and considered by many to be a top 10, maybe even top 5 overall prospect.
Yeah, it's wild to me that they constantly have someone like that. Like you said, Wander graduate, and then Junior Caminero comes up and just takes the board. And then you had Kyle Manzarno, who was getting into like the top 25, was getting a lot of comparisons to Vinny Pasquantino.
Yeah,
It's
big
just
time slugger.
yeah, it's just an impressive system overall. I mean, the one thing I always love about the Rays is they constantly have the next guy in line, right? You saw this year Taj Bradley came up, made his debut, and they
Absolutely.
always seem to have like pitching prospects kind of waiting in the wings. But I think this year the one thing that stuck out to me is there isn't as many arms as there usually are in the top 30. What is your take on the pitching for the prospects for the Rays?
Yeah, so actually, as you noted, it's not as deep as I would say as it has been in the past with
Yeah,
higher level pitching prospects. However, the Rays organization has definitely been known to make the most of the talents, and they seem to draft guys that other teams know if the Rays are keen on them that there may be something special. So whether it's an arm slot, a certain pitch that they see, and that's actually something that they addressed in the draft. Most of their early picks were hitters. However, 14 of their last 16 picks were pitchers. So that
wow.
kind of goes to the fact where they feel like they can, make the most of any sort of arm talent.
Yeah, I think it's just impressive. They kind of know what their needs are, right? And they go in there and they just kind of they replace it and they fill it the gaps that they know that they have. And then not every team does that. I mean, like
Absolutely.
being a Royals fan, the one thing I notice is that there's gaps constantly, and then sometimes they just go against the grain in terms of the draft, like they did a little bit this year as well.
Right.
Um, just speaking of the MLB draft, what was your take kind of on the Rays draft this year? I was looking through their draft board just before this podcast, and there's some great names in there. But are there a couple of guys that are really sticking out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this draft just seems like classic Rays work. I think they
Hmm.
got a lot of talent, especially with the picks that they had gotten. So I definitely think with the early picks, they prioritized bats. Three of their first four picks are 4-year juniors. So I think that their front office realizes that they're within a window of contention to draft established collegiate talents. And that's exactly what they did with the 19th overall pick when they picked Braden Taylor, who I think's very talented, polished collegiate hitter, well-rounded game. And most mocks projected him gone by that point. I think he's a terrific FYPD value as well.
Yeah, the one guy that stuck out to me that I think got a little bit overlooked at LSU just because of Dylan Cruz and Paul Skeens, but Trey Morgan, I think that guy is Gold Glove first baseman. I mean,
Absolutely.
he's super talented. The power is kind of questionable, but I mean, if he can just tap into just maybe even 20, 15, 20 home runs, I mean, that kid's going to be a talent.
Very strong contact rates with Morgan as well. So again, if he can tap into some of that power, that makes him a more well-rounded prospect. He may not have the general power profile of a first baseman, but as you had mentioned, Gold Glove caliber. If he can wield the stick, that could be his carrying tool as well.
Yeah. There's a couple guys I want to touch on too, kind of circling back to the Rays top 30. The first is Carson Williams. I've seen a lot of hype around him as a prospect. I know there's some concerns with the strikeout rate, but I want to get your thoughts on Carson Williams and what kind of player he might be. I mean, it seems like the tools are just ungodly. The exit velos are
Oh yeah.
insane. I mean, just talk a little bit more about Carson Williams.
Yeah, absolutely. So when he was drafted, that's a high-end prep shortstop with the Rays. Kind of just seemed like a perfect match, and he's really been matching. So this year he's got 13 homers and 11 steals across 67 games and a 5.02 slugging. So as you had mentioned, just oozing talent, tons of tools. And while the strikeout rate has been a bit inflated, there's certain things you have to give and take with the prospect. So if you can hone in on fixing that one thing where he's been so successful in other areas, I think that will definitely vault his stock. And in my updated midseason rankings, I actually have Carson Williams too in the system. So
Who do you got behind Carson? You don't have to reveal it all. I know it's coming
no,
out.
no, of course, it's actually coming out in like a day or so. So I'd be more than happy to just provide a bit more additional information. But the top three would be Caminero, Williams, and I do have Manzardo at third.
That makes sense. Yeah. And
Mhm.
so, out of the top 30 prospects, who do you think is going to be the most likely to get called up? Is there anybody that you're seeing going to get called up this year, like Manzardo, or do you think most of those guys are going to be waiting until 2024?
So in terms of top 30 prospects, I do think there's a couple of them to definitely keep an eye out for. One of which, who I do have just outside of my top 10, but probably still higher than most people, would be Austin Shenton. He was just promoted to AAA and has kind of been filling in for Kyle Manzardo in that first base role, even though he generally plays third base. The dude mashes, high average OBP, had a bit of a down year last year, but he's really put that in the rear view there. Player, a pitcher in the top 30 that I think could definitely debut soon would be Jacob Lopez. He is 25 and he's been pitching really well in AAA. So as you had mentioned, like with Taj Bradley, how they're very familiar with that next man up, I think that Jacob Lopez could fill a bullpen or even a rotation spot for this Rays team.
Yeah, Jacob Lopez was going to be one of the other guys I touched on during the under the radar segment. I mean,
Hmm.
the numbers are insane, and that's the one thing about the Rays too, right? They may not always have that top tier pitching prospect, but they just get these late round guys in the draft, it seems, or
Exactly.
just via trade, like you said, and they just kind of come out of nowhere and explode. And I think Jacob Lopez is one of those guys. Are there any other arms like him that you're seeing kind of in the system that might be popping up like him?
So arms that are popping up like him, I would definitely keep an eye on Nick Bitsko. He did have a slow
Mm,
start to his career, but very analytically advanced. Kevin Kelly, who's actually in the league now. I do have him a little bit lower down the list, but he's starting to make waves, and I think that's somebody to keep an eye out as well. Cole Wilcox is a pitcher I'm always very high on. I know he had a bit of a rough outing his last time out, but before that, I believe his last four starts is really starting to dial in, and I think that's somebody that's supremely talented and could be in the upper echelon of pitching prospects once he really gets settled in.
yeah, I really love Cole Wilcox. I liked him coming out of the draft too,
Me too.
out of
Oh yeah.
Georgia. Great
Mhm.
arm.
Bulldog.
The one guy I do want to touch on, just kind of before we go into some under the radars,
Sure.
is Evan Reifert. I know he's been injured. Do you know any status update on kind of where Evan Reifert stands? He came out of the Arizona Fall League just looking incredible. He was a
Yeah.
part of the Mike Broso trade. I don't know how to say his last name, but yeah, just an incredible arm. And don't know if you have any updates on him.
So I don't have any updates in terms of his current status, but as you mentioned, very talented arm. Coming out of the bullpen, it posted really high strikeout rates. So I think that's an arm in particular, especially when you look at the analytics and the numbers that the Rays, the organization in general, can make the most of. So definitely hoping for a speedy recovery. As you had mentioned, he was really dealing in the fall league. And I think once he recovers, he can get back on that foot. Again, it could be a player that's fast tracked to the pros.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of the trades that you talked about, right? They took a depth piece basically in Mike Broso, and they traded him for Evan Reifert. And then Reifert all of a sudden becomes Arizona Fall League reliever of the year. He's pitcher of the week down there. He's one of the rising stars in the All Star
Yeah.
game. And like, that's just a small trade, right? That's not even a big major one to get a major prospect. They just went and plucked a guy who was, I think, our 30th rounder in 2018, didn't even sign coming out of college, or didn't even get drafted coming out of college, was an undrafted free agent. Uh, the, it's just insane to see that kind of stuff happen all the time with the Rays.
Absolutely. And then, even with a player we had previously mentioned, Junior Caminero, he was
Yeah.
acquired from the Indians or the Guardians, should I say, for Tobias Myers, who was 6 months later traded to the Giants for cash consideration. So, I mean, this is somebody we're talking about as a potential top five prospect, and just the foresight to acquire him was pretty special by the Rays.
Yeah, I think about the Royals, and the last time, or one of the last times they traded the Rays was the James Shields deal. I'm like, they did well in that one. I don't know if I ever want to see them trade with the Rays again. Not the way that
It's a
they're
tricky
working.
proposition, absolutely.
Well, Jake, we can't thank you enough for joining us to give a little bit of overview of the race system. It's awesome to just dive into the prospects. But for people, though, where can they find your work and be able to find everything that you're doing?
Absolutely. So I appreciate you having me on. I do most of my work race coverage for Prospects 1500. You can find me on Twitter at Gator Sosa, and that's generally where most of my content is shared.
That's awesome. Everybody make sure to check out Jake's work, all the awesome work that everybody does at Prospects 1500. Got all top 50 lists for every single team there. So just make sure to check those out. But without further ado, we really want to get you to that interview with Colby White. All right, we are here with another incredible interview for Behind the Scenes by Just Baseball. We have Colby White, a right-handed pitcher with the Tampa Bay Rays. Colby, how are you doing today?
Man, I'm great. It's a pretty day down here in Florida, so getting healthy. Can't complain. Thank y'all for having me on.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on. And the one thing you talked about and touched on, getting healthy, that's what we really wanted to talk about. Some behind the scenes, we really focus on those stories outside of baseball that players have to go through on an everyday basis as an individual human being. And you have to go through this injury recovery process, right? You were on a quick path to the big leagues, like you had an A ball, double A, triple A, all in a row in that incredible rise during the 2021 season. But kind of take us into the moment you found out you had to get Tommy John surgery and kind of what that impact was like on you and how you've really powered through this injury recovery process.
Oh, so it kind of takes me back to the end of 2021. I noticed my arm didn't feel as fresh. You know, it was my first full season.
Yeah.
It didn't feel fresh. I was fatigued, and I had a bunch of teammates who say, "Man, it's just that time of year. They call it the dog days, so to speak. Nobody feels good around September. I say nobody, the average person, and so I kept just throwing through it and all. Obviously, I don't know that there was a bad structural damage happening in 21, but I know when I ramped back up for spring training in 2020, I don't know if I tried to ramp up too quick because we had the lockout.
Yeah.
So it kind of pushed spring training back a little bit. And I was getting a few innings in big league spring training. I still to this day don't know really the definitive thing that caused it. But I remember I threw for like a 2 or 3 week spell in spring training, and I just didn't feel great. You know, It wasn't like I was like, okay, there's definitely something wrong. My velo was down a little bit, but I was still throwing pretty good in the first couple outings. And I remember right before we went to break spring training, break camp, I went in and told the one of the pitching coaches, can't remember exactly who it was. I was like, man, I'm going to need a few days. You know, go to feel it, whatever. I'm going to need a few days off. I'm not feeling great. And then he said, well, go talk to the trainers and, let them do whatever kind of work on you they need to help you get ready. So I went in there and told them, I was like, man, I'm having some elbow stuff going on. Probably going to need a few days. So they just went through some Tommy John tests. And I remember the trainer laid my left arm back, and it kind of gave, pushed back into him some, gave some resistance. Then he done it to my right one, and it really didn't give back into him. It just kept going. There was no support there, and he was like, man, you might need to get an MRI. And I was kind of in denial because I was like, hear stories of guys. It's like, oh, you feel a pop or whatever. I never felt a pop, which was very weird to me. But then I had a different form of Tommy John, so to speak. I had an avulsion, which Well had, Yanni Chirinos, Jared Parker for the A's. He had that. So I actually broke the epicondyle bone that the UCL is connected to, and it was floating around in the back of my arm. And apparently, I had thrown for several weeks without it not even connected. And when I saw the X-ray, the doctor, Dr. Eaton in Tampa, he said, as you can see in the X-ray, you at least have a bone spur or a bone chip. He said, but I'm willing to bet this is part of your epicondyle. And so we went in there and he showed me the MRI, and he was like, yeah, your UCL is connected to this bone floating around. You're going to need surgery. And this is what was the crazy thing about it. It didn't really hit me initially like, hey, I'm going to miss a year and how much time was going to be into it. But I was just so exhausted from my arm being in pain, So I was like, I'm just kind of thankful that we figured out what it was and road to recovery. And I'm thankful. This is going to sound crazy too. I mean, there's been bumps in the road in it so far, but I'm thankful it happened. I've taken a ton.
Yeah, talk about that mindset about kind of being thankful it happened. What are kind of some of the lessons that you learned going through the injury recovery process? Maybe it's like taking care of yourself a little bit better, or like kind of having that notice that like, oh, things can happen in the game where your career can kind of get derailed, and kind of really opening up your mind to what the potential is out there.
Right. Well, see, I had always all through college, all through high school, probably even little league. I would rather hurt and pitch than not pitch. And it was kind of a thing to where I took pride in college or in pro ball until I got hurt of saying, "Hey, I'm sore, but I can cowboy up and get it done. I'm available. I'm going to be close to my best, even sore, even some fatigue, whatever, and I'm going to help the team. And then it kind of, after having surgery and learning good habits and learning things to look for, things to not throw through, because I feel like, and not saying this toward a old coach or a old trainer or whatever, but as a whole, I feel like the whole college baseball system and high school system, there's not enough knowledge on what should be hurting or sore and what shouldn't. Everybody knows in this area that's where the UCL is.
Yeah.
But far as like forearm tightness and stuff like that, I feel like now I know more what to look for, after having numerous conversations with trainers that have rehabbed Tommy Johns. And so, yeah, I mean, just kind of understanding what should be sore, what shouldn't. And then also, biggest thing I've taken away from it is listening to my body more.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants a plan in pro ball. I need to do this today. I need to lift legs today. I need to do arms today. I need to do this amount of arm care, this amount of arm care. And more so lately, over the past, it probably hit me around the 9 or 10 month mark when I started having a few setbacks, which I had got on the mound and started trying to put effort onto the ball. But I started realizing I got to listen to my body more, my arm more specifically, and not just cookie cut a plan.
Yeah.
And again, not saying, it might work for some people, but I know my body more than anybody, just like you as a person, your body more than anyone too, So, and just recognizing, hey, I'm tender here. Don't keep aggravating it. Let it rest, let it relax. Because I was always the kid that all through college, I would lift every day I could. When I ran, I would run every day I could. Do arm care. I do all the arm care I could and do more than I needed probably. And so the moderation piece has been big, and then the nutrition piece. So full round circle of understanding, like, hey, you got to be as close to healthy every aspect of it as you can, so trying to stay away from like never going through a fast food place, all through college, late at night, you pull through McDonald's or wherever, Chick-fil-A, now it's like, hey, I'm a professional athlete and I had surgery. I got to put some quality stuff in me. So those are just some little things that I have taken away from it, and I've certainly learned from, because I definitely do not want this surgery again, but I am thankful that I'm able to throw again without pain. So
yeah, I mean, that's incredible, because I think the one thing that you really kind of touch on is you got a lot of people telling you things and like giving you information, but you find a way to balance and like find what works for you, right? I think we interviewed Bryson Motts with the St. Louis Cardinals. He said the first piece of advice he got into Cardinals camp was like, listen to everybody, take it all in, but find out what works and what doesn't work for you, because we're all each individual human beings, right? Some things are going to work for one guy, they might not work for the other guy.
Exactly, like the penicillin thing.
Yeah.
Penicillin might save somebody's life, might kill the next one, and might do nothing to the other guy. You know?
Yeah. That's awesome. It's cool to see that you're on this recovery process. So as you kind of have been pushing forward through it, who has been like some of the biggest help you've had during the recovery process? I know you've had guys like Cole Wilcox who have gone through some of the similar things. We've interviewed him before and he's talked about that, but has there been like certain guys around you that have really kind of helped support you, whether it's family, friends, things like that?
Yeah, well, my family, my fiance, she does a good job of keeping me level-headed, because it's mental warfare, really. When you show up to the field every day and you can't go out there and you wish you could, and and you do it for months at a time with one goal, just to get healthy. It's hard, and my family, they do a great job too. Both of them, they try to keep me to where don't have too much downtime. I'm doing something, don't have much time to think. But yeah, Cole Wilcox, I've called him numerous times and gotten, hey man, this is going on. I'm sure him, along with others, have been aggravated because I ask way too many questions, but something will pop up in my head and I'm not scared to ask it. I'll be that guy. But yeah, he's a A+ teammate and human being when it comes to that kind of stuff. I'm very thankful for him, and along with the others, I was around like Drew Rasmussen and spring training, other guys that's had it a few times, and I always try to like use it as like a buffet. Like, this guy said this, I'm going to take that with me. This guy said this, I'm going to try, and just trial and error like we were talking about earlier. And, I've messaged guys on Instagram and they've replied and what, just, I don't want anything going through this process. I didn't want anything to be unheard of for me. Like, I don't want to be getting out of it and somebody said, well, you should have done this. This is why this is happening. So I felt like I approached it the best informative way that I could have, so to speak. Yeah, man, there's for me, there's too many guys to name, to thank, but everybody's been so supportive and trying to help me and giving me their honest opinions and information on it.
Yeah, and I love that too, because you reached out to people, right, for help, and not everybody will do that. They're like, oh, I got this on my own, I can do this. But you're like, hey, let me see what I can find, get the best information to make sure I have the best recovery process for myself. I think that's awesome.
Right.
So what are the next steps for you in the recovery process? Are you close to getting back out there and throwing? What's the next goal for you here?
So I am at live bullpens right now, or batting practices. I'm sorry. I pitched in one game probably a month ago down here in the rookie complex, and I'd had something kind of irritated with my shoulder, just a little inflammation or whatever. And I kind of took that as a moment to just kind of relax a little bit, like take stress off of my shoulder, do more lower half, do more conditioning, do more stretching. But yeah, I'm at the live BP stage, and then next week I'll face hitters in games down here, so it'll be a more realistic look. And just trying to make it as game like every day and catch play is a hard thing to do because there's 3 different stages to the Tommy John thing I've kind of figured out. First stage is healing. Once you heal, and then the next stage is strengthening the arm, and then after that you got to tell yourself you're fine, you're healthy. Don't throw in labor. And so catch play, I would try to throw and ask, oh, how's my arm feel every day? And I kind of went on the spectrum too much of worrying about how my arm felt. So I feel like I've kind of got over that mental hump of saying, I'm fine, throw it. If I feel a little something, it's going to work itself out. If it doesn't, then I'll take a step back, but just giving it a chance and work on my stuff, work on my slider, work on my splitter, throw more strikes, work on my kicks, So, and right now, my biggest thing is when I get in games next week, I'm going to work on the pitch clock because that's going to be a little adjustment. I've never thrown on a pitch clock. So I don't want it to be a shock when I go to an affiliate and I'm throwing, and I don't even know the time. That's how crazy. I think it's 15 seconds, 14 seconds.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so whatever it may be, I'm going to try to get acclimated to it while I'm down here, and it's a lower stress situation than, let's say, if I was in AAA or wherever, So that's just kind of been what's on my mind lately. I'm healing really good. My shoulder feels great. So taking a step back and relaxing some was the secret recipe for me in this little setback.
Yeah, I got to imagine the mental part is probably the hardest to get over, right? Because you go out on the mound and you're probably like, oh, if I do the X, Y, or Z, it's going to tweak something again. And next thing you know, you're back being injured. So I have to imagine like that mental hurdle is probably one of the hardest ones to get over.
Right. Well, and that was the thing too, and this is going to sound dumb, and I'm sure some athletes go through this too, specifically pitchers, but I never thought about getting hurt. Yeah. Like, for years, it never crossed my mind, like, and this is going to sound crazy, I honestly thought I couldn't get hurt, know? Like, I was just so oblivious to the fact that, hey, this thing can go. You hear people say it's not about if, but when. I didn't believe that, and I don't know if everybody's going to have Tommy John. There's going to be guys that probably pitch 15 years in the big leagues and won't have it, but I'm more aware now that, hey, when I'm sore, it's not best to cowboy up with my arm soreness and just keep throwing because that ends up in surgery. So, but yeah, I mean, it's crazy how much the mind changes, over the course of a few years.
Yeah. So as you kind of approach to the getting back onto the mound, what was that moment like when you first stepped on a bullpen mound? You got to throw a baseball. Like, you just went through all this adversity, powered through the entire injury recovery process. Kind of take us into that moment.
So I was playing catch for, I guess, around 4 months or so before I got on the mound. And I remember when I first started playing catch, Joel Smith, he's with the big league club now, but he was my minor league rehab athletic trainer. I'm probably botched that title, but he's done a bunch of Tommy Johns and he knows what he's talking about. And I remember him telling me, because I had ports, they drilled little ports in my in my bone to thread the UCL through. And I remember him telling me, he was like, man, you need to really be conservative at the beginning stages of the throwing program, not to just gas them up, throw hard or whatever, just gradually build the workload. And so my first couple times off the mound, I didn't go on the mound thinking, okay, this is game 7 of the World Series. I'm facing a really good hitter. I kind of made sure I didn't have an adrenaline rush, even though, when you step back on the rubber, it's like, man, this is where I belong, and the heart to start beating a little bit. But I really try to tone my effort down because I wanted it to be a gradual ramp up. And I think I've done a really good job of that. And then, you hear people talk about setbacks in the Tommy John process. Until you start putting effort on the throws, at least for me, like I don't know that there's anybody that's going to start putting effort on the throw and it not something not go to barking,
Yeah.
So when I did get on the mound, it was a surreal moment. I teared up a little bit. I was actually at home on my high school mound the first pitch I threw off of the mound, which was kind of crazy. But yeah, it's been a emotional little thing, but very, very exciting for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, we're all excited to see you back out competing, going out to the affiliate levels and really going out there and getting after it. So kind of diving into a little bit more of the fun related questions. So you've been at single A, double A, triple A, kind of worked your way up all the way through the minors. What's like some of the weirdest or coolest stories you have from your time really hitting every affiliate in those different random towns?
Oh, man, I the thing I go to thinking about is, I came out of spring training and I threw very well in 21 spring training. And then I remember breaking camp in low A, and I was upset really. I mean, because I thought I had done more than some guys that had skipped low A. And I know that's a bad way to look at it. You shouldn't compare, shouldn't question or whatever, but I did, and I was sitting there and I was like, man, I don't know what else I need to do. Like, why am I down here? I don't even think I allowed a hit in spring training. Threw like 11 innings, struck out 2 an inning. So, I mean, I threw very well. And then I remember I hit a point to where I was like, okay, if I ever get my shot at high A, I just got to dominate. I was aggravated and it motivated me. But for me, a cool thing was just seeing the different hitters at each level. And I guess what they were doing with me in low A was wanting me to mix in breaking balls more, which I kind of refused to do so because they were making contact with my slider and they weren't touching my fastball. So I was like, why would I throw them a cookie? But it was more of a development thing. And that's how it had been for years. But it was just crazy how the approaches would change as a whole as I went up. Like high A, they were trying to ambush fastballs. If you threw a fastball early in the count, they were going to swing. And more than likely, they were going to hit it. So I had to start mixing in some sliders, and doing more of a cat and mouse game, so to speak. And then double A was basically the same, felt like the same league of hitters, so to speak. And then I remember triple A, I hit a moment to where we were reading through scouting reports and all that, and I was trying to do something a little bit different than what I was, throwing more breaking balls, throwing more, other stuff. And I got realizing, like, I'm a fastball pitcher. I talked with a pitching coach there who was Rick Knapp at the time. He was like, man, you got a good fastball. Don't just bail out on it. Don't cower to anybody. You go in there and tackle them. And I remember I had an outing there after – I had a rough one where I allowed a run off of a double, oppo ball off the wall there. And the next outing, between outings, I talked to Coach Knapp, and he was like, you throwing a bunch of sliders. Why are you throwing a bunch of sliders? The guys can't hit your fastball. So I think I threw like 11 pitches in that inning, struck out 2, and they were all fastballs. And I was like, man, this is the same hitters I faced 2 nights ago. Like, different result because I'm just pitching. Yeah. And in that moment there, I mean, I don't know how wow it is to other people, but for it to happen to me and me think, okay, I got to do something different than what I've done, it just kind of gave me a peace of mind that my stuff is good, and not trying to say that as like, everybody says, oh, my stuff is, but just self-assuring, not really as a boastful kind of way or whatever, but just let me know that I belong, So when you start at a low level and then you work your way up, you kind of question, when is it going to end? When is somebody just going to really get on me? And which I only threw like 9 innings there, but the 9 I threw, I think I only allowed a run in like 2 of that appearances. So I kind of settled in a little bit, and now working back from Tommy John, that's what I'm trying to get back to is what made me good before, and then how do I stay consistent, because that's the big thing is consistency. So just seeing the difference in hitters was a really cool thing to me, because there is, you hear cliches like, oh, the SEC is AA or whatever, I don't know that you can compare that, but as far as each level, the hitters have different approaches and how they execute.
Yeah, I mean, I will say SEC is probably the best baseball, definitely in the U.S. Just because I worked at the University of Nevada in baseball ops, and we went to Arkansas to play Arkansas, and it was just like night and day between Nevada and Arkansas. I think they lost. It was like a rain game. Somehow Arkansas, pouring rain, still almost packed out the entire stadium for a rain game on like a Tuesday. It was insane. And the SEC is just like a whole different breed.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, diving into the last couple of questions, we always have one fun one and then kind of end on a more serious one. So what's been the go-to restaurant or type of food that you've been going to during the rehab recovery process?
So early on, I didn't eat as healthy as I should have. I realized that, but here lately, man, so I can't remember where I was at, but I was in rehab, and I went to my first Brazilian steakhouse. And man, I guess this was probably 6 months or so ago. I'm a big meat guy.
Yeah.
So I bet I've went to at least a dozen since then. In 6 months, I probably went to a dozen Brazilian steakhouses. And Texas Day Brazil, any kind of there was one in where were we at? Orlando. It was called BR77. The real deal, man. I mean, I probably gained 4 or 5 pounds in there eating just straight meat. You can't really you can't go in there and take up on the vegetables too bad. You gotta get the. I mean, it's unreal. Which I'm a big steak guy, but it's delicious. Any of those you go to, or for me, it's a fun time.
You get a good steak, and it's just like night and day. If we're going to like Outback Steakhouse, and then you actually go to a real place, it's like
right.
So much better.
And as a kid, if I ate a steak as a kid, every one of them were good. And then I hear my parents talking about it, or my grandparents talking about, oh, they got a good steak or whatever. Now, as I'm older, I understand what they're, because I guess I've ate enough different variety of stuff. But yeah, man, if I see a Brazilian steakhouse, for the most part, I'm pulling in there if I have time or money, and I'm eating. I'm him.
I love it. Yeah, kind of rolling into the last question. This is one we kind of end with every interview, just because we want the podcast to be an interesting thing for fans, but we also want it to be like opportunity for like younger guys to learn from other players. So if you had like one piece of advice for any guy who's going through some of the same adversity you had to go through, the injury recovery process, what would that one piece of advice be?
First thing, never doubt your ability to adapt to situations, because as a baseball player, if you play this game very long or do it at any level pretty high, the whole reason you were able to do that is because you were able to make adjustments quick, you were able to adapt quick. And the Rays talk about that all the time, but also growing up, my dad would talk about being able to make adjustments. He would use the word adjustments, but I think all those kind of link together. So and just trusting yourself and your ability, and just knowing like, okay, I'm in this situation and it's different than anything I've ever done. Or maybe you've went through surgery a few times, but just knowing that that you can trust yourself to figure out what to help you get healthy quicker, and just never doubting. A lot of times when you're in the dog days, so to speak, in recovery, you doubt things like, man, am I ever going to get healthy? Am I ever going to be what I was before? But when you have that ability to adapt and figure things out and troubleshoot things, I feel like you always get back to where you were. And obviously that's what I'm working on right now, is still trusting the process and loving the process, and it's a hard thing to do. People say trust the process. It's much more than working hard, so that's just kind of.
I was going to say, I think that goes back to too, when you talked about when you're on the mound and going from level to level, just trusting in your stuff and the stuff that you got. Because like, if you don't go out on the mound with confidence in the things that you got or the process that you're taking, like that guy's already beating you in the batter's box.
Right. You're competing against yourself and him.
Yeah.
And your brain's a lot stronger than whoever's standing up there trying to hit off of you. So.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think it's a great way to end the interview. Colby, we can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us. We're wishing you nothing but the best. I can't wait to see you back on the mound out there, dicing people up again.
Thank you, man. I sure appreciate you getting me on.